Hello, my name's Darensa우스콧. I'm a visiting professor at Jeju National University. In this lecture, I'm going to be talking about education for intercultural understanding and education for sustainable development. The lecture aims today include introducing intercultural education, which is slightly different from multicultural education. I'm going to be talking about the differences and why those differences are important. I'm going to be introducing education for sustainable development, and I'm also going to introduce how we can use intercultural education through education for sustainable development. I don't think this is the only way we can practice intercultural education, but I do think it's a very important tool and a very valuable way to integrate the two. And then I'm going to look at how we can empower students through connecting the local to the global through our own communities and using education for sustainable development. Okay, so the key point, the reason we are looking at this issue is because Korea is diversifying, just like many places around the world. So these issues are becoming more important to enable us to understand changes and how to adapt to those changes. Now, as you can see, the Kim Do-gyun, president of the Korea Immigration Service, has said that homogeneity is a myth and our future is multicultural. I think it's important we look at these issues now as Korea is developing into a more and more multicultural society. As we are at an early stage, it can help us learning how to move forwards, maybe learn from the successes and the failures of other places around the world. So this is an issue that we all need to look at in more detail. So let's look a bit closer at what intercultural education is. As I said, this isn't multicultural education, although it's very similar. There's a very slight difference in focus. You may have heard of multicultural education, but intercultural education, although very similar, goes beyond passive coexistence to achieve a developing and sustainable way of living together in multicultural societies through the creation of, understanding of, respect for, and dialogue between the different cultural groups. This definition is taken from the UNESCO Guidelines for Intercultural Education, and the difference here is very much about interconnection and communication between groups. This is a bit different from some approaches to multicultural education, which focus more on separate groups. Intercultural education is much more about the dynamism and communication between groups. I've chosen this image because I think it really shows the differences in the issue. Here we see multicultural, and then we have cross-cultural, and here we have intercultural. I think these images show the key differences. Multicultural means we live as separate units within a diverse society. Cross-cultural means moving from one culture to another. It's a one-way process. However, intercultural, at its heart, the philosophy of this type of education focuses on communication, interaction, exchange, and through that process, how we can learn from each other and develop a cohesive society. So this is why I chose this approach rather than what might be considered a more traditional approach to multicultural education. So let's have a look at the UNESCO Guidelines for Intercultural Education. They've laid out some guidelines which help give guidance to approaches to intercultural education, so we can see how to implement these ideas. They have 3 principles. Principle 1, intercultural education respects the cultural identity of the learner through the provision of culturally appropriate and responsive quality education for all. So here we have a focus on the individual. We're looking at how to develop and foster skills, abilities, competencies in the individual. Then we have principle 2, which provides every learner with the cultural knowledge, attitudes, and skills necessary to achieve active and full participation. Now, this is a key term, participation. This is why I think sustainable development education is so important for intercultural education, because it maximizes, it allows individuals to participate. And this is a key term to offset some of the problems experienced in a diverse society. Then we have principle 3, which provides all learners with cultural knowledge, attitudes, and skills that enable them to contribute to respect, understanding, and solidarity among individuals, ethnic, social, cultural, and religious groups and nations. This goes back to the intercultural philosophy, which is exchange between groups and between different groups in society. So we start with the individual, then we look at ways of allowing the individual to participate, and then with the third principle, we focus on how to maximize exchange between these individuals and groups in society. And these are the key core principles of intercultural education that I want to look at as we focus more on education for sustainable development. So we've looked at intercultural education, some of the principles behind it. Let's now look at sustainable development and see what that means. What are the concepts behind sustainable development? So one of the key focuses in sustainable development is to meet the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Now, this quote is taken from one of the founding documents for sustainable development as a concept, which is the Brundtland Report, which came from the World Commission on Environment and Development in 1987. If we're talking about building a multicultural society and ensuring that it is founded on intercultural principles, we need to think about how to build a society which is able to meet our future needs. If our society is becoming more multicultural, then we need to deal with that now as we move forwards. So this is a concept shared by sustainable development and by intercultural education. So let's have a look at the overlapping concepts behind sustainable development. Here you can see this is a very well-known circular representation of sustainable development. These are the overlapping concepts, themes behind sustainable development. We're looking to balance society, environment, and economy. Here it's represented as people, profit, and planet. The economy, of course, profit, planet, that's including nature and the environment, and then people as well. So it's about finding a balance between those. If we have an overemphasis on one area, such as the economy, then it's possible that people, our communities, our livelihoods might suffer in some way if we give too much emphasis to perhaps the economy. Also, if we neglect the environment, then we're not going to hit this sustainable sweet spot that enables balance between all of these areas. So this is the key concept behind sustainable development, finding that balance. And I think part of this balance includes finding a way for all individuals, all communities within our society to have a participative and fulfilling experience and being able to fully be integrated into our democratic systems, into our welfare systems, and into our communities. And that's why this is directly relevant to intercultural education. So, having introduced in a simple way sustainable development, let's look now at education for sustainable development. This is slightly different. It's not just education about sustainable development. It's a very distinctive approach to education that is empowering for the individual and for communities. Okay, and this quote, again, taken from one of the founding documents that have inspired a lot of the work in the sustainable development area, is from Agenda 21. In chapter 36 of Agenda 21, it says, education is essential for changing people's attitudes so that they can try to solve sustainable development concerns. Education is essential for promoting environmental awareness, values and attitudes, skills and behavior for sustainable development and public participation in decision making. Again, this is why it's a key concept that is shared between education for sustainable development and education for intercultural understanding. Why is that? Because here we have the focus on participation and decision making. And if we want to achieve a multicultural society, we need to ensure that all individuals within the society are participating in our democratic processes, and they are empowered in decision-making areas, and that will offset alienation and exclusion within our communities. So I believe this is very important for anyone looking to build a multicultural society. So let's look at some domains. Education for sustainable development has these concepts of domains which guide forwards the approach to education. They include the cognitive domain, which refers to reflection, analysis, and knowledge. These are areas that are typically associated with critical thinking, analysis, looking at problems in society and working together to solve them, to find the best solution. Then we have the affective domain. This is more emotionally based, socially based, about relations with other people, how we can empathize with the situation for other people in society. And then we have the psychomotor domain. These are kinesthetic areas and also physical action. And this is focused on producing change, action. How can we make changes in our society? So we start with critical analysis, often seen as an individual process. Then we move to affective domain, which is more about feelings and working together. And then we have the psychomotor area, which is more about action and producing change. And I want to show how we can use these in education to move from learning about a subject to moving forwards to producing change and producing action. So if we look at knowledge first, so knowledge is a key domain within education for sustainable development. This is linked to action. We view knowledge as shared and co-constructed. It's not an individual domain, it's something we work together to construct. So we look at this as something we co-construct through partnerships. You can see the connection with intercultural education. Knowledge relates to time, past, present, and future, and also space, local and global. So we're putting knowledge within systems that connect us with histories, with our landscapes, with other people. It's not an individual thing we get from a textbook. It's something that is a process of construction that we are building together with other people, including people in our communities. Another domain which is very important is systems thinking. And now this is one of the key areas that I think has high potential to enable education for intercultural understanding through education for sustainable development. We place our society, our individual self within a complex system. As globalization makes the world more complex, it's changing our local community. It's changing our relations with other people. It's changing our consumption, our consumption and production systems as well. It's changing our lifestyles. And this is because we are increasingly part of more and more complex global systems. By thinking about this, we are able to place ourselves in relation to other people and other places around the world. And this enables us to reflect on what we share with other people, but also what makes us distinctive. And these are very important for any attempt towards intercultural understanding. We also have emotions. We mentioned the affective domain. Of course, being able to empathize with other people is always going to be the foundation of any approach to intercultural education or multicultural education. We need to be able to look at the experience of other people, reflect on what they experience, see how we are interconnected with other people, and empathize with their situation. We can do that by using the other domains, critical reflection, analysis, building knowledge together, and reflect on how we are interconnected in a global system. This is why I believe that education for sustainable development enables us to build an intercultural society through education. It, at its heart, is putting our community within a global system, which is becoming more complex. We need to understand those connections. This provides a tool to do that. We also have ethics and values. Of course, any approach to education must have ethics as its foundation. We can take those ethics from our principles. We have principles from UNESCO for intercultural education, but we can also look at other ethical foundations to build our education system around. I've used the example here of the Earth Charter, which by its essence puts other communities around the world at its foundation. Also, our relationship with the natural world is at the foundation of this approach. This is, in its essence, intercultural and multicultural because it does not prioritize any one group over another. In fact, it puts us all on an even level and puts the ecosystem at the heart of all our decisions and all of our ethical principles. This is one example, but of course any ethical program could be used as the foundation that has intercultural values at its heart. And then we have action, and I think this is a really important aspect of education for sustainable development and intercultural education. We need to look at ways to get students to think about action. This is the kinesthetic, the psychomotor domain that produces change. There's really not much point in educating without allowing students, empowering students, capacity building students for action. How can we change what we see in the world? How can we make a difference in our communities? These are things we need to think about, and that has to be at the heart of our education programs. So if we are doing intercultural education, it must have within its system, within its program, an ability to promote change, to empower students for change. And that is through action. And here we can see, we can put these at 4 levels. They can be at the individual level, the classroom or school level, or they can be at the regional and global level. This enables us to contextualize our position in a really complex system at different scales. And so I think this is really important for any attempt at either education for sustainable development and also education for intercultural understanding. Okay, so we've looked at intercultural education, we've looked at education for sustainable development. Now let's have a quick look at how we can practice intercultural education through education for sustainable development. Here you can see that we can focus on these global competencies and global domains to practice education for sustainable development, and this provides an ideal framework to practice intercultural education as well. We can use the competencies that we have outlined, things like knowledge and action and emotions and analysis, and use these as the framework for producing intercultural education that is effective and action-oriented. So let's look at some examples then of how we can practice education for sustainable development and also enable intercultural education, because we can promote those principles of intercultural education as outlined by UNESCO through education for sustainable development. We want to connect the local to the global. We want to connect students from all backgrounds with their environment, with their landscapes, give them a connection with the area in their local towns and also with other places around the world as part of these complex systems that we need to understand to really enable a multicultural society and also a world that is working together to solve problems. We also want to build solidarity with other communities around the world and also promote action towards the goals. Things like climate change, things like ending conflict. These are all objectives that require intercultural education, intercultural understanding, and they also have at their heart education for sustainable development. So we can do this in this way. We have the Sustainable Development Goals. What is really useful about these is we can look at each of these processes and use that as a window to look at different problems in our communities, aspects of globalization that have affected our towns, our landscapes, and use these as a way of practicing these principles that I have outlined. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at some examples from my local area, Jeju Island, and I'm going to show how we can use these Sustainable Development Goals as target points to practice intercultural education, and also we can practice education for sustainable development. So let's have a look at how we can practice and implement intercultural education by using the Sustainable Development Goals. So here we have one of the big industries on Jeju Island, which is wind power. We are targeting carbon-free island by 2030. As part of this project, wind power stations, farms have been installed across the island, and the island is moving towards being carbon-free. Of course, this targets climate change, SDG 13, and also SDG 7, affordable and clean energy. So we can look at aspects of our local environment and we can see that we are targeting a global problem. So we can put students in their local context, looking at renewable energy, and they can reflect on how this puts them within the complex global system of climate change. Now this connects them to the local, it connects them to their landscape, so they can look at action-oriented problems within their local environment. However, we also need to look at how we can connect with other places around the world. So we don't want to fixate on our own landscape alone, although that is a key aspect. We also need to look at other places around the world that are dealing with climate change. Again, climate change is a global issue. This is part of putting ourselves within a complex global system. As I said, this is how intercultural education and education for sustainable development can be linked. We can link our classrooms through the issue of climate change with other areas around the world. We can also link it with our own landscape through renewable energy projects. We can connect with schools around the world. Maybe we can go and connect with a local primary school in other areas. Maybe we can develop relationships online with individuals in other communities, learn about how other communities are dealing with climate change. How are they responding to it? What can we learn from them? And these put the principles of intercultural education at the heart of education for sustainable development. But remember the key foundation to intercultural education and education for sustainable development. That is action. And as you can see, SDG 17 is about partnerships for the goals. This is an action-oriented SDG. It's about making change. And I believe that by using issues such as climate change in the classroom, we are not only connecting students with their own landscapes and then with other communities around the world, then we can look at how to build action-oriented education programs that empower students to make change. They can look at how to lessen their own carbon footprint, and they can look at how to actually develop climate protecting systems of their own within their communities. This is a key aspect that we need to focus on. We can also look at bottled water. I'm sure this is a familiar sight to many people. Here on Jeju Island, we are blessed with water resources. We have some of the largest underground water supplies in the region. We use it as a valuable natural resource. We drink it every day. But we don't think about how it connects us to people around us so much. We don't think about how it puts us within a global system of consumption and production. And so we need to reflect more on what this means. What is the benefit of bottled water usage? What are the costs environmentally of bottled water usage? This puts students within their local environment and gets them to reflect more on some of the costs of their consumption. This also can connect us to other places around the world. Let's look at what happens to the plastic we throw away. How does it impact other communities? What happens to the plastic bottles that we drop on the floor or that wash out into the sea? They don't stay around us. They go to other places. They impact other communities. They impact the environment. And so students can be made to reflect on these issues, looking at the costs of our own consumption. Again, this is connecting SDG 6 for clean water with SDG 15 for life on land and SDG 14 for life on water, below water. And then we have action. So we move to number 17 again. How can we develop action-oriented education? Let's look at how students can actually develop action-oriented goals through education. What can we do to lessen waste? What can we do to lessen water consumption? Maybe we can drink tap water when required. Maybe we can ensure that we use a refillable cup for our water usage. These are ways to connect students to the landscape, connect students to other communities, and ensure they are developing action-oriented programs through their education. Finally, we can look at tourism. Jeju, a famous tourism island. We have lots of benefits from tourism, you might think. It's brought a lot of economic benefits to the island, but there have been large costs as well. Looking at tourism puts us within this global system, increasing global travel, increasing global consumption, increasing building and urbanization on the island. And by reflecting on tourism, we are engaging with SDG 12 on responsible consumption and production. We are engaging with SDG 14, life below water, and SDG 15, life on land, because we are seeing more and more environmental degradation. Now, Jeju Islanders are experiencing this, but so are many other communities around the world. So we can connect with other communities through these themes that are within our landscapes, within our communities. We can use them to connect with people that are different from us, different countries, different communities, different cultures. We can develop partnerships with schools. We can learn about other areas. How are they dealing with tourism? How are they dealing with overconsumption? And then, as always, we can look at action, SDG 17. How can we implement action for change? Students can look at how to develop sustainable tourism projects or conservation projects in partnership with other communities around the world, in partnership with different cultures within their own classroom, in partnership with online connections. So these are ways to ensure that we use these themes as the planting board, as the jump-off point for action-oriented education. Okay, so let's summarize on the values that this approach brings us. What is sustainable about intercultural education? Well, education is crucial for promoting social cohesion and peaceful coexistence. By encouraging dialogue between students of different cultures, beliefs, and religions, education can contribute to sustainable and tolerant societies. And this is why I think it makes a perfect fit for intercultural education. What is intercultural about education for sustainable development? Education for Sustainable Development also aims to promote understanding among students of their place in complex systems. This entails increasing awareness of how they are connected in various ways to other people, places, or cultures. And so I hope this presentation gives you some ideas about how you can implement intercultural education through education for sustainable development within your own classrooms. Thank you for listening.